Thank you for joining Change Your Mind Transformational Dialogue Radio. Your host, Dr. Craig Weiner, brings you cutting-edge experts and paradigm shifters in fields as diverse as body-mind healing, neuroscience, and consciousness explorations. Join us on this voyage to explore new worlds in science and transformational pathways. Seek out new understanding and boldly go where few have gone before.
So good morning. Thank you for joining us. This is Dr. Craig Weiner, your host on Change Your Mind Transformational Dialogue Radio. And you'll hear me every time at every show say this, that it is truly an honor. It is truly my joy and pleasure to welcome today's guest. For those of you that have somehow never heard of Lynne McTaggart, you are in for a real treat. So I'm going to give a little introduction for Lynne with new information you may not know or repeat information, but Lynne is the author most currently of The Bond Handbook, creator of the Bond groups. Basically, we're going to talk about the bond, the connection between us. But if you haven't heard of that, then surely you've heard of The Intention Experiment or the groundbreaking book before that, The Field. A little history on Lynne is Lynne was an investigative reporter for years with the Chicago Tribune. She currently lives in London. She's been an investigative reporter, an editor, and author of multiple books. I learned, but I didn't know, that she had launched the column of Dr. Robert Mendelsohn, which was truly a groundbreaking column for people looking for new ways to look at healthcare, especially for their families, at a time when we didn't hear a lot of outside-the-box thinking within the health field. So we get to wish a great hello and welcome to Lynne McTaggart. So welcome aboard, Lynne.
Thank you. It's lovely to be with you.
This is fabulous. I have been a follower of your work since The Field, and I can't tell you how many presentations that I have highlighted and noted and information and studies that have come from your books. So I want to thank you for all the work that you've done that I've benefited from, and all the people that listen to me have heard from you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Craig.
In reviewing, we're going to talk a lot about the book, The Bond, because it really is about the connection between us, and as individuals and with nature and in community, and we'll get to that. But I want to ask a little bit first, as somebody who gathers information and puts it together and synthesizes it, kind of how do you get your ideas? It feels overwhelming to think how you put all these studies together and create them into stories. So I would love to hear a little bit of insight into your personal methodology, or how you bring what you bring together and synthesize it. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. I think it resulted from an interesting mix, which was I started out my writing life, and my interest in writing came from when I was very young, but I became very interested in both journalism and investigative journalism, particularly after seeing the success and the importance of people like Woodward and Bernstein, because I saw that, these two junior journalists, through a lot of dogged digging, had brought down a corrupt presidency, and that made me realize the power and responsibility of the press, and it made me want to be an investigative reporter. So I had that, I learned my craft through that kind of real deep digging, the, dog with a bone type thing. And one of my great mentors said something I've always kept in mind, which is, he said, they haven't said no until they've kicked you down the stairs. And I think that was a really interesting comment, because it really meant, you have to go back and be really persistent, and that you have this weighty responsibility to be a member of the Fourth Estate, to be a watchdog. So I started learning that. But I was also at the same time very interested in narrative nonfiction, writing nonfiction that read like a novel. So I've always been very interested in writing and interested in the craft of writing. So I saw myself as a writer first. So I wanted to marry those two things. And then the third piece of the jigsaw puzzle came into effect when I met Robert Mendelsohn, because Mendelsohn was this absolute, paragon of the medical establishment. He was on the board of licensing for the state of Illinois and had done government programs in Project Head Start. And yet, here was this guy who was like your kindly Jewish grandfather totally savaging most of the medical procedures and drugs we take for granted. And so that just shocked me. It truly sent tremors through all of my belief systems because, you know, I had grown up, like many of the baby boomers of my generation, you know, with this whole idea that, you know, better living through chemistry, you know, that science was this infallible monolith that would make life easier for us. And here he was saying this whole paradigm is all wrong. So that probably subsequently launched our newsletter, What Doctors Don't Tell You, now a magazine. But in that course, it always kind of, I started centering on science, and I kept finding good studies showing things like that spiritual healing works, that acupuncture works, that homeopathy works, you know, some very good studies of these three things. And I kept thinking to myself, that's really strange, because if this is true, it violates everything we believe about how the world works. So why would this be true in the so-called material world, the materialistic world model that we've been given? So that really prompted my investigation into the field. And I really didn't know what I was looking for. I sort of conned my way with my publisher by saying, I think there's something out there like human energy fields, but I'm not really sure, and I'd like you to fund this journey. And, you know, to my astonishment,
they did.
Yes.
And I actually loved in the field, innocence isn't quite the right word, because, however, there was this very fresh perspective of somebody that was awed and stunned by the amount of literature and research that was supporting things that felt controversial, that people were pessimistic about, and yet you're saying, look here, look here, look here, it's here, it's here. And there was, I really love that perspective, because I think it matched many of the readers that continue to read your work, that once they go down that rabbit hole and they discover it, they're just never the same.
Yeah, I get told that thousands of times. It's really interesting. But it was truly that journey for me, because I'd always been sympathetic to alternative medicine, particularly so after having a bout of illness myself and having it treated by somebody who was really a pioneer in nutritional medicine. That got me very interested in non-drug ways of healing. And again, that's something that's never left too. But what I didn't realize I was going to find when I started talking to the physicists who end up appearing in the field was how much of a revolutionary experience and journey they themselves had taken. I mean, that, you know, together added up to a complete revolution in science. And so I think that was my real surprise, because I honestly thought I was going to find, I went to talk to scientists and, you know, did my usual digging the way I do as an investigative reporter, and I thought I was going to find some scientists on the cutting edge who were going to say to me, yeah, there's human energy fields and this is it, and I'd write it up and send it in and, you know, publish my book, collect my advance, and that would be it. What I didn't expect was the fact that no one really had an overview of what was going on. Everybody, each of these scientists had a little piece of the puzzle. And each of them added up to something really important, but they hadn't put it together, because scientists are not, you know, they're told and discouraged from doing that. You know, they're told that, you know, to stay within the limits of their experimentation and not to venture out with speculation. And also, the other reason is because scientists talk in code. You know, they talk in math. And so after a while, I realized these guys are doing something really important, but if I'm going to make sense of it, I've got to do this myself. And that was very daunting.
Right.
Very daunting at first.
I find that what you do, especially in the Bond, in the idea of a left brain, right brain approach, and not only the way that you do it, but in what comes out of the bond, is really how do I look at the big picture? How do I connect this through a personal narrative and story, and with an inclusiveness and a creative perspective that I bring story to science? So I'd like to kind of work this into the bond because I think it so exemplifies the taking of the discovery of energy fields and non-local healing, but it moves it into a very real me and my community, me and my connection to family and who I live with, and how do I transform that? So where did the idea, I mean, I think that bond was a natural next step, but I'd like to hear from you how that transition happened and move into that.
Well, each book was kind of flowed out of the other, and I don't have any grand design for books. I just cover things that I'm personally interested in. And the intention experiment came out of the idea from the field that, you know, a lot of scientists had hinted at, that consciousness is an actual something with the capacity to change physical matter. So the journalist in me was basically asking the question, well, how much can we do with this? You know, how much evidence is there for the idea that a thought is a thing that affects other things, and what can we do with it? So that was the intention experiment. And with the bond, I'd always felt, after I wrote The Field, that this is a very different story from the story we've been told about who we are. Mm-hmm. And stories not only define who we are as human beings, but also, you know, they help to create the rules by which we live, because, you know, we live according to the definition that we're told about who we are. And science really writes that definition more than any other factor these days. And so I suddenly realized that if we have this very different scientific story, if this new chapter is now being written, that really says something very different about how we should be living, because, you know, we're living according to two major and very outdated stories. The first is the Newtonian story, that the world is populated by a lot of separate things that only affect each other by force, you know, by you know, if you freeze something, burn it, drop it, or give it a good swift kick, you know, then you affect it. But that things are wholly self-contained. They're complete in themselves and wholly self-contained. That's what Newton told us. We're separate. And then Darwin told us those separate things actually need to compete with each other because there's a terrible struggle to survive, and only the fittest do. And, you know, Darwin's ideas, that idea of survival of the fittest, not his coined term, some of his friends, but that idea, which really came out of population explosion ideas of the time, that there's not enough around, folks. There's just not enough for everybody. So life has to proceed through struggle. Life's a race to the finish line. So that idea began, thanks to mass printing, which occurred around the time that Darwin published his ideas on the origin of species. That swept the globe and became a justifying principle for a lot of burgeoning movements like industrial capitalism, colonialism, you know, even psychopathic behavior. You know, Hitler loved Darwin. And, you know, you cannot underestimate the effect that Darwinism had on us. It really became, competition became absolutely okay, absolutely desirable, and became the engine of every aspect of our society, from the educational model to the financial model to even relationships in our neighborhood. So the question I had, because I'd come out of thinking about this from the field, was, you know, was it supposed to be like this?
Right.
Were we really supposed to be this? Is this what nature had in mind for us? And if not, how are we supposed to be? And the other reason I approached the bond was because, you know, life had collapsed in 2008. And that was just when I was starting to formulate my ideas about what this next book might be, and, you know, and pitch it. You know, we had this massive financial collapse. And that seemed to me to augur of days of this particular mindset. And that's what I start out in the book saying, that we all sense that we're at the end of something.
And yet where you really took that was, given the illusion of that collapse, given the illusion of separateness and distinctness that people were feeling, the connection between everything is, which has always been a strong spiritual meme, so to speak, really has its foundation scientifically from between people and nature, between people that are distant, and you really did a beautiful job on taking it from the neuroscience to the financial industry to so many levels. I mean, you did a beautiful job with that.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to show that, the all in the small, that there is no such thing as things. I thought I better make the whole argument starting from subatomic particles.
Right.
And scientists who, constantly look for the smallest thing in the universe. I mean, that's what scientists do. They take apart the universe like a big old radio, and they keep looking for its tiniest component parts because they think that if they can find those, then they can define the big stuff. And, scientists have been looking in vain for that smallest thing. And every time they think they've found it, something smaller comes along. And the main reason I say in the bond is because there are no such thing as things. On the subatomic level, there are only relationships. A subatomic particle is a strange shapeshifter. It's just a lot of it's a vibrating packet of energy, trading energy with other subatomic particles and a background energy field. And so as it's constantly changing and sharing and, morphing into something else and exchanging energy and information, so you can't divide either of those things, that subatomic particles operate in relationship. And what I was trying to say in the bond was this is scaled up in every aspect of nature. Nature has designed us only in relationship, and we can only understand ourselves and only hope to operate effectively when we operate with nature. And nature has, unlike what Nietzsche said, he always said there was a will to power, and I argued in this book that it's not. It's a will to connect.
Excellent. What is it you think that will cause a tipping point when we look at studies even by the Federal Reserve and we start to see economics that are influenced by solar flares, when we start to see cultures that are defined by proximity of people that make us happy and friendships, there's so many things that when we look at creating community, we look at big pictures, that there's so much evidence that says that how we are in the moment in relationship with each other defines health of the single being and a cultural being. What else do we need to have that cause us to make, not necessarily laws, but to make the shifts to play those out so that we do those more successfully?
We need the breakdown of what's happening now, and that's going ahead whether we like it or not. Because, people, we're all lazy, and we're all hardwired with the competitive mindset. So we all think, well, if we wait around long enough, there'll be an economic recovery, and it'll all go back to what it was, and we don't have to make a shift. But I think more and more people are recognizing it's never going to be what it was. That is gone. That mindset is gone. That the success of that mindset is gone, or the so-called success of that mindset is gone in terms of financial affluence, etc. And that we have to get on with a new way of being because it's being forced upon us. Financially, we are not in a good place. And then in so many other areas, it's, we are running out of oil. We're going to have to look at other means of powering ourselves. And more, increasingly, life is moving toward the idea that we have to reestablish strong communal ties, because that is going to be the unit that moves us forward and allows us to evolve.
I'm really very fortunate. I live on a place called Whidbey Island, which is an incredibly close-knit but incredibly diverse intellectually and artistic community of which people that live here feel blessed because they even call it magical. They try to define what it is about this community with this proliferance of nonprofit groups and this idea to take care of each other and stay connected. And I hear you speaking about that movement to the smaller, that movement toward that interconnectedness of smaller pieces. Could you talk a little bit more about what you're trying to achieve with the bond in that way in communities?
Sure. Well, the bond was very much, a book that was trying to argue for a different way of being. And then when I published the paperback Bond in America, I added a lot of exercises and practices because I felt people wanted, they needed a roadmap for a new way of being. And in the book, I had said there were 4 basic things we needed to do in order to change that hard drive of separate and competitive to bonded and inclusive. We needed to see more holistically. We needed to learn a different way of relating, so it's not all about what's in it for me. We needed a new paradigm that was not, I do best for society by looking after number one. That's why in the book I talk about that wonderful scene from the movie A Beautiful Mind, where the Russell Crowe character, John Nash, who is a postgraduate mathematician and economist, is sitting with his buddies in a bar, and they see a blonde who's with her brunette friends, and all of the guys are attracted to the blonde. And they say, well, okay, guys, it's every man for himself. And Nash sits there and says, no, because if we all go for the blonde, we're going to block each other and no one will get her. But if no one goes for the blonde and we all go for her brunette friends, then we'll all have a girl, basically. And, and there he runs out and he suddenly says, wait a minute, Adam Smith was wrong. The best response is not what's good for me. The best response is what's good for me and also what's good for the group. And he runs out and he writes up this theorem, which is supposedly which gets him the Nobel Prize. Now, that was an invented story, that thing that happened, but it's true, he came up with the Nash equilibrium. We do best for ourselves. Our best response is not only what's good for us, but what's good for the group. And that's an interesting change in the paradigm that I suggest needs to be the new one. So I talk a lot about making that the new paradigm. I talk about the idea of bringing people together who may disagree with everything the other one stands for, but if you have a larger goal, what's called a superordinate goal, that brings people together instantly. So I have a lot in there about it, and finally about how you, with the tiniest of acts, can be a powerhouse of change. So I put all of that in the book, and I wanted to give people a little head start, a bigger roadmap for how to do this. And I was also a little discouraged with some of the very obviously commercial approach to 2012 in many areas, that people were, making an awful lot of money out of quote-unquote evolution. And I felt that was wrong. So I decided to put together a program for people in communities that would give people a step-by-step way of rebuilding their communities from the bottom up, and that I would just give it away for free. So that's what I've done. I have that on my Bond site, which is www.thebond.net. And if you click on that, in the front it says, your evolutionary action plan. Click here. And you click there, and all I ask people to do is to let me know if they're going to start a group, and they can download the whole thing for free. And that's what I've done.
Fabulous.
I just on the website a couple of weeks ago, just a week or so ago, and we already have hundreds of groups forming. 52 New Thought churches in the U.S. already are interested, and we've got groups all over the globe starting to form.
That's fabulous. I see the possibility, I also want to thank from the UK, transition towns, which I've been a part of here as well, and that movement toward, given climate change, given economic collapse, given all those things, how do we have a thriving, sustainable community, which is, thank you for the contribution. I'd like to move us also into well-being in healthcare, something you've been involved with very much, and the transition that we're seeing, being a chiropractor but being involved with some of the newer developments, for example, in EFT and matrix reimprinting. So many of these techniques that are emerging seem sometimes almost too good to be true because they're facilitating changes quicker, they're utilizing the factors from how we think and how we believe that affect our physical well-being. So at that paradigm edge, could you speak a little bit about maybe some of these fields and what you're saying?
Yes. I mean, then that's another area of, fixing a falling down world that I'm very interested in, which is health. I have been the editor and co-founder with my husband of a newsletter for 23 years called What Doctors Don't Tell You. And last September, we turned it into a 100-page magazine. It's available now in the UK in all of the the newsstands and the supermarkets, and it's also online. But it's soon coming to America too, and a number of other countries around the world. We really, as I mentioned earlier, I was very affected, very inspired by the work of Dr. Robert Mendelsohn, and I wanted to take that further and just use investigative journalism to investigate medicine, current and conventional medicine, and also alternative medicine. I wanted to see what's got evidence working and what doesn't. And we have been doing this for 23 years, as I say, and every month we are just shocked at the kind of stuff that we come up with. Just the appalling lack of evidence for most of what we consider standard operating procedure in medicine.
Right.
And I'm also continuously astonished by some of the very good studies for very promising alternatives in so many areas. And many of these alternatives, as you mentioned, things like EFT or thought field therapy, which has a lot of evidence, are things that completely defy our paradigm of how the body works. And so this taken together really suggests to me we have to have a completely different view of medicine, that the materialistic idea of the body as a machine that gets broken, and once it's broken, stays broken, or the idea that you can give a chemical, like a drug, to the body for some chronic problem, and that this drug will very easily operate. It will slot tab A into slot B because that idea is based on the idea that the body works in a very strict linear fashion. And all of that is being demonstrated to be completely fallacious. We are really understanding the body as this multiple, holistic, dynamic system, and also a very, very powerful self-healing mechanism. Machines don't heal themselves. So, more and more, I'm really interested in looking at that and the very cutting edge of that. And we try to do that, but in our magazine, we also look at the evidence all the time. As I say, I try to bring that hard-nosed edge of journalism to these subjects because I always like to say there's not much woo-woo about me. I like to have evidence. I like to foray into these farthest reaches of interesting new areas, but I like to ground any of it in science.
And I want to thank you. You do an excellent job on that. And, my personal investigations right now into, for example, the fields of understanding trauma and how that affects us in gestation, in childhood, and how that contributes toward, quote-unquote, our destiny. And the tapes, a la Bruce Lipton and epigenetics and Alan Shore, and we've interviewed Robert Scare. So all that work that happens that affects how we are as parents or how we are as children, and how that has that tendency, probably even more than our genetics, to determine our health and our well-being and our future, is just so rich, and I think every day coming out with more research to understand that more fully.
Fantastic.
It's so important. And then also, the work that we're looking at with, especially in mindfulness meditation and so many of those things, that's just how we think and how we focus our thoughts and how we focus where we put our attention upon, has tremendous impact. And all of these things used to be the soft sciences, and now they're reaching the journals, and it's a very exciting time, I think.
Oh, absolutely. 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 I think that is what's so interesting now, is watching that we are so much on a trajectory to a different place with medicine, just as much as with the other sciences now. And you can see that with the decline of modern medicine, all of the scams that are coming out about the pharmaceutical companies, and the lengths to which they have gone to try to, be profitable is quite shameful, really shameful. That's something we write about a lot. The only concerns I have are their very, full frontal attack on alternative medicine. They're doing that in Europe via the EU, and enormous legislation that is trying to dismantle alternative medicine. And it will be happening in the States, and is happening via Codex and the UN. So I think all of us have to not be complacent, but understand that this is, the lashings of the dying dragon, but that we have to be careful, because they are trying to eliminate alternatives.
Where do you see us in 10 years, Lynn, with regard to the changes that you're speaking to, especially with regard to healthcare and where we're transitioning towards?
Well, I see these next 10 years being quite I think there is going to be a big struggle between conventional and alternative medicine, but people are walking away from conventional medicine. They're distrusting the whole idea of drug-based medicine. So I think that the many alternatives will get a lot stronger, but only after a struggle. I think the pharmaceutical companies will attempt to buy up a lot of alternatives. Mm-hmm. They are already doing that. They're trying to buy they're very interested in the supplement industry, the vitamin and mineral industry, and they're trying to buy up a lot of things, trying to buy up some alternatives. They're trying to take over herbal medicine, things like that. So I think that there will be that struggle too. But I also think there's going to be an enormous rise of energy medicine, which there is already. The whole EFT, TFT, matrix repatterning, matrix, all of the different matrices, ideas, loads of things like that. Some that are very effective, some not. But there will be a big, big push toward all of that, and the use of, the connection between the healer and the healee as being the healing process.
Right. It seems as if so let's go to the healing of the individual, of the responsibility, and yet that has to happen in context, in relationship with their relationships, the healthy environment, the community, and culturally. We see all of the health of all of those concentric circles being critical to the healing of the individual, and vice versa, that back and forth relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, healing is not a matter simply of, healing, X tumor in my body. I think healing is all about taking responsibility for every aspect of your life. And I'm very interested in the ideas of Rutgerd Hammer, who's a German doctor who pioneered a thing called the New Medicine in Germany, after his son was killed, and right after that, he developed testicular cancer. And that fascinated him, not only the fact that he got cancer, but also where he got it. And it was like, illness is metaphor, that whole idea. And so he started thinking, cancer might be a trauma. And he started treating people for the trauma, not the cancer. He didn't try killing the tumor, he tried killing the trauma, and alleviating the trauma. And the cancer would mostly go away. It's one of the most successful treatments in Germany, alternative treatments for cancer. So I started thinking about a lot of that, and we just interviewed a guy who was diagnosed 30 years ago with, really advanced lymph node cancer. And they said, you got to have chemo and radiotherapy and blah, 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 blah. And he just said, no, I'm not doing any of that. I have left the center of my own life. I'm not living the life I should be. I've got a very stressful work situation. I'm not seeing my wife and children, all of that. So he just slowed right down. He started taking very healthy supplements, eating really healthily, taking very high doses of vitamin C, and meditating and breathing and doing all of those things. Cleaned up all of the chemicals in his life, and the cancer disappeared. And, here it is 30 years later. So I'm very interested in those kind of cases of so-called spontaneous remission. Right. They occur over and over again, and they're all about the person looking at, what's not really working in my life? And what is this? Why is this a wake-up call? And what do I have to do differently? Because I think the most dangerous thing doctors can tell a cancer patient is, don't change anything in your life. Live your life as you always did. Just have this chemo. That's exactly what they shouldn't do. Right. Cancer is the ultimate wake-up call of saying, you are not living the way you should, and you've got to do something really differently.
I remember years ago reading some of Rachel Naomi Remen's work and some of the other work that really pointed to what seems like the prescription that we're needing to offer now is exactly that, is that the body is a manifestation physically of what's happening psycho, emotionally, energetically, and that the real healing, as you say, the spontaneous remissions, come when we have somehow woken up. And we somehow then change the areas of our life that aren't working. And I think that is turning the tide, and we're seeing that, and now even the bigger tide to turn is how do we start living that before those kinds of scary diagnoses happen. That what I'm doing now is what matters with regard to my future health and well-being. What I'm thinking now counts. What I'm feeling now counts. And
And, I think a lot of that is getting out of this trap rat competitive mindset. Right. One of the things that I found in the Bond all the time is that community is the best drug we've got. That I was really fascinated by the study of the Japanese, who smoke like chimneys but don't get heart disease until they move to the States. And then some of them do, some of them don't. And when epidemiologists start looking further, they find that the Japanese who get heart disease just as the Americans do at the same rate are those who adopt the go-ahead, individualistic, competitive lifestyle. Those who don't get the heart disease are those who maintain their strong sense of community as they have in the old country. And community's been shown to, protect people against not only heart disease, but stroke and even the common cold, all sorts of things. Right. So I think that strong interconnected bonds are really almost a centerpiece to staying well.
I agree. We have about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to ask you, Lynne, how, on one hand, it seems as if there's benefit to diversity of opinion, of background, of creative thinking. So on one hand, we want diversity, but on the other hand, we need to somehow, with that, also create a sense of connectedness and cohesion, which sometimes can be a challenge to have both.
Well, here's my answer to that kind of question. I don't see that they're mutually exclusive.
Right.
There's only one big problem. I'm not arguing for communism. I'm not arguing for the end of individualism or creativity, I should say, or creative endeavor or individual achievement. What I'm arguing against is individual achievement at other people's expense. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean, creating a business that's successful for you, no matter what it does to other people, to the climate, or whatever. It's that sort of thing. So it's the idea of understanding our interconnection and thriving in that way. And as I say, we do best by our best response to any situation is not only what's good for us, but what's good for the group. And that is a little message to live by. And if you just apply that little yardstick to so many areas of your life, that makes it easy. Nothing in that says, I can't do well, I can't be creative, I can't achieve, I can't do things by myself. But it means that I don't do things at other people's expense. It's not I win, you lose, which is the mantra of our time right now.
Right. That sense of collaboration was always helpful for me in the indigenous teachings of how are the actions that I'm taking now going to affect 7 generations forward. And then it's really having the long term in mind, the sustainability of the actions that can thrive and grow and expand and preserve, rather than just usurp and use at the expense of anybody and anything else.
Exactly.
So how, on a personal level, has the exploration of this work changed you in your life? And let me go there next then.
Okay.
In other words, how do you implement this on a daily level in a way that makes a difference that has transformed how you walk your talk, so to speak?
Well, it's made me think a lot about why certain things happen, the path. It's made me think a great deal. Once I started doing work on the field, it made me think a great deal about what messages to give my children. I have 2 daughters. I have a husband and 2 daughters. And I watched that with them. I'm very interested to see that my 23-year-old has really adopted, while not being as interested in these areas as I am, she's very much adopted the whole sense of you create your own life. Your intention matters. And I was fascinated to see that play out in many aspects of her life. It's changed me. It's humbled me. It's also made me believe very firmly that we have to create things in a different way, that I try to do in both my family life, but with friends and also our business. So to try to do things differently. But, like everybody who has been essentially brainwashed with the competitive mindset, as I have, as we all have, from the time we've been little, we've been imbued with a sense of individualism at anyone's expense. It's a learning process for me, too.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that there was something that you would like to be able to give away to listeners, to be able to offer, so that they can take this information and have it be more than just an intellectual fascination and really bring it into their lives. I want to give you a moment for a little commercial about that as well.
Well, I was, as I mentioned earlier, was, a little sad about some of the commercialism of 2012. So I wanted to give away a big program, create a program for people that would be a complete map of how to recreate their communities, how to relate to people, even people who are very different from you, how to become big change agents in their area, how to be I wanted to give them a full evolutionary action plan. So that's what I've done. For people who see the bond.net, they can just come onto my front page, click on Get Your Free Evolutionary Action Plan, and out will come a 27-page week-by-week program that they can use individually and as a group to create what I call a bond pod, which is a small group for change and renewal in their community. And it gives them week-by-week lessons, discussion topics, individual and group practices, individual and group intentions, the whole lot. And I'm going to be supporting these periodically with little teleseminars that just help people in their groups. And eventually we're we're probably going to, ask people to start reporting on it. The pods are going to be speaking to each other on my website. People are just starting to join up. And as I say, we've got hundreds forming now. We've just started, and it's really fantastic.
Thank you. I think that offering that helps people take something that is inspiring, but helps them to take it into action, where sometimes they feel lacking in that skill. And the gift that you bring, which I'm passionate about, is bringing the science that's out there and making it applicable so that we can feel stronger, like it's not just something that would be great to do, but it's something that has evidence behind it, and then taking it from the evidence into the story that relates to me personally, and then being able to give me an action plan to do something about it. It is just beautifully laid out. I just want to thank you so much for that contribution that you're making.
Well, thank you. As I say, I just wanted people to have a real action plan, that would just give them, how do they form a group? What does the group do? How does it do group intention? How does the group then start learning to see much more holistically, to relate to each other differently? How do you deal with people who are totally in opposition to you? How do you come together for larger goals? How do you, in your own little life, when you've got all this work to do and family, how can you become a big agent for change? So I've tried to provide all of that just as I say, on a very day-by-day, step-by-step basis.
Oh, that's terrific. The name of the show, Change Your Mind, Transformational Dialogues, has always been meant to provide guests and insights with change agents that can inspire people to truly transform their personal lives and their community around them. And I think that this was a perfect example of meeting that intention. So I want to say thank you for today, for your time, and for all you're doing. It's greatly appreciated.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So with that, I think we will close today's show. I will be a source of being able to continue to provide information. We have upcoming guests include Dr. David Feinstein. We'll have Dr. Larry Dawsey, and the continuation of this discussion will go on. And so thank you from London, Lynn. I appreciate it, and I look forward to our future interactions.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Craig.
Have a beautiful day.
You as well.
Thank you for joining us today on Change Your Mind Radio. For more information on this program and more, go to www.transformational